Hello. So this is part 5 and potentially the final part of the console restoration, at least for now. So we're going to kick off today taking a look at the power supply, checking it over and getting it ready to be all connected. So one of the things I will do here is actually bag up the screws. It might sound like a really small thing, but over the years I've found if you do not mark the screws, you do not bag them up, that eventually these projects quite often take a lot longer than you expect and you forget which screws go where. So as you can see, the power supply has not been used for a very long time. It is absolutely caked in dust. And while the dust itself shouldn't cause any problems, I just wanted to make sure it was clean. I wasn't just going to be throwing dust everywhere every time I had to work on something, and that it was in a decent state to power up and test out. So as you can see, we're getting decent power and it's actually all working. So last time we built the frame, now it's time to start putting the console back together. Finally it's coming together. So here I am putting the bolster on the front. I will replace this at some point. My intention is to go for a very nice piece of wood, or I even thought some nice fabric that obviously won't get too dirty too easy. So you can see there's a lot of cabling that needs sorting out first before I really can start putting things together. And I thought I would start with the master bus. Now you might remember from episode 1 that I took a lot of photographs to work as a memory aid later, and that's exactly what you can see me sort of reversing the process of here, where I'm not entirely sure what these cables do yet, but I'm putting them back where they were in the hope that that was the correct place in the first place. So the master bus is hooked up, it's ready to be placed in. All we need to do now is connect up the power supply, find something to provide some audio. I'm going to use a Roland TB303 emulator, and do I get action? Yes, finally, I've actually got life on the console. There's no sound yet, but I've got life. Let's put a few more strips in. So you can see that basically the cables will sort of sort themselves out as I go along. This is once again where you end up grazing your fingers. There's, blood going everywhere. It's not the most fun thing in the world. And you'll see later, trying to remove a single strip can be extremely frustrating. So as I'm connecting each strip, I power up the console, I do a quick check, and anything I notice that's not working with that strip, I make a quick note of. And now we have some life. So this is quite a bit of relief at this point. It means all of that work, all of that time rebuilding those strips, putting everything back together, pulling it all apart in the first place, it's going to pay off. I'm actually going to have a working console at the end of this. Alright, time to move ahead. We've got a lot to get through in this episode, as you can see. So, console's up. As I'm noticing problems, I keep making more notes, and we'll move ahead, and we've almost got all the strips in. It actually looks really cool. This is the first time I've ever seen this console in a clean state, and it looks really nice. You can see there I'm using a tea towel to actually rest the console strips on when I get them out. It's a quick and easy way to make sure I'm not scratching up the surface of other strips, or scratching up the knobs, of course. So as you can see, it's a bit of an effort to get each strip out, especially if there's other things around it, but it's manageable, and it's a lot better than tearing down an entire console. So here I'm changing one of the comparative chips for the VU meter on that strip. Really easy to find. As you can see, everything's labelled. It's just a matter of popping things out, replacing them, popping the same part back in, obviously a working part, and away you go. So 1982, that's been in there since. As you can see, doing this in situ, it's a little hard to maneuver chips around and to get your fingers into places, but there we go, it tested fine, we're up and running with that strip. So at the bottom right of the VU meter, one of the LEDs is so much brighter than the rest. I spent a day troubleshooting that thinking it was a dead op amp, but it turned out to be just one of the LEDs had blown. So this is one of the VCAs or fader controllers. You can see it's had some serious overvoltage and actually blown the top off the chip there and blown apart the transistor. So the first thing I'll do is actually go and get some transistors and a new chip, and we'll desolder those, which is pretty easy to do. No solder mask on the boards, as you can probably see, so it's a bit easy to bridge connections, but as long as you're careful, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. So just getting that little transistor out, there we go. So all I have to do now is replace it. As you can see, I've got two transistors there. Normally if I'm replacing a single part, I'll buy two of that part if they're cheap enough, just to make sure if I do something crazy and break it, that I don't have to wait another week for one to arrive. So here I am soldering it back in. I'm sure you've all seen many people doing soldering on the internet, and it's always a lot harder than actually doing soldering when you're not filming, because you have to make space obviously for the camera and make it so people can see what you're doing. Once that's in, obviously I'm just cutting off the legs of the transistor, and then I'll remove the flux that's on the board. You can see there's a lot of flux left over from original manufacturer. I didn't want to go too over the top, so I've cleaned it up. I've cleaned up some of the existing flux. It's a lot better than it was. Okay, so now it's time to replace that op amp. Literally, you just pop it out. I normally use a screwdriver, not a chip puller, just because it's a lot easier to get things out without causing damage or damage to yourself. So just gently prying it out works a treat. So pushing the chip down, and we should be good to go with that. A quick test here, moving the fader up and down to test the range, and we are good to go. So checking some of the functions on the master bus, they don't seem to be working properly, and this was my own fault. I'd actually connected some of the red connectors on the master bus back to front, so I resolved those, and there was a few small breakages in the loom that was running at the bottom of the console, so I'm just soldering that back together and then just heat shrinking it so it's not going to short out, and yeah, that should be good for a very long time. So I've actually moved the console around at this point, and it's actually on the other wall in the studio, and now it's time to put the master bus back into the console, and we should have a fully built console. Oh, and before you seal up, always check that you've taken everything out of the bay there before you put it back together. I actually lost a screwdriver for a few days that I'd left under one of the channel strips. Now there's a block of dense foam actually under the master bus that holds the PCBs on the bottom together, so that's why I'm pushing it down and it seems to be a bit proud. I've made some modifications to some of the patch bay just to allow for more modern routing options and the ability to be able to route audio through it without actually powering up the console. So one of the mounting plates on one of the faders was broken beyond repair. I 3D printed up a replacement, and that came up really well. I connected it to the fader and connected the fader back into the console, and we were done. So here it is, a fully finished console. Well, almost. You see, I ran into one serious problem, that the LED driver ICs that run the meter bridge on the back of the console, unfortunately they're not produced anymore, and they are seriously expensive to get secondhand, and I need a lot of them to get that bridge working. So until I can come up with a better solution, unfortunately that will just be there for show. It won't work. I can't get it working. It was some tantalum capacitors on there that had blown the ICs, and I'll show you more about that in a little while. I managed to find brand new button caps to actually replace a lot of the broken button caps I mentioned early on in the series, and at the end of the day it's pretty much up and running. It's usable, it's doing what it's supposed to, and it looks pretty cool and sounds super warm when you put bass through it or any big percussion sounds. Absolutely fantastic. As I mentioned, the patch bay is absolutely awesome. You can just route everything to everything. I've got a few other patch bays in the studio, but this one's super easy to get to, super easy to use. So all in all, to really get the console to this point probably took me about 6 months of work. I spent a lot more time than I'm showing here actually debugging each of the channels. And so at the end of the day, here's all the components I had to replace. Some of them were in the power supply. Unfortunately, I didn't film that part of the repair. And as you can see, a few capacitors. Mostly it was just little op amps that needed to be replaced. There's some of the broken button caps. You can see they were absolutely shot. As I mentioned earlier, I had a bunch of tantalums go bad on the meter bridge, and they went full short and pushed 15 volts where 15 volts wasn't supposed to be, and that's why the big meter bridge no longer works. So there you have it. The console is built, the console's in use, the console sounds fantastic, which is sort of the most important part. And I probably will run a mix through it soon, and I'll put it online so you can actually hear and see the console in use. But thank you so much for going on this journey with me. Thank you to all the people that have been watching this series, and I hope you enjoyed this almost final part.